Comment on the video, where are people watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. In the opening moments of the narrative, the unexpected confrontation immediately grabs the reader's attention through its dramatic clash between ordinary suburban life and an assertive display of power. The narrator recounts how, while simply going about his day, he is accosted by Karen, the HOA president, who confronts him with a single demand: move his Tesla. This introduction sets a provocative tone that hints at deeper conflicts hidden beneath the surface of community living. Karen's appearance in this initial moment is striking, not merely as an enforcer of mundane rules, but as a figure whose authority seems to supersede common courtesy. Her demand is delivered with an air of unyielding control and entitlement, establishing her as the personification of the HOA's strict, often overbearing, regulatory stance. The specificity of her role as HOA president underscores the institutional power she wields and foreshadows the broader implications of her actions throughout the story. The choice of the Tesla as the center of the confrontation is significant as well. In today's socio-cultural context, a Tesla is not only a mode of transportation but also a symbol of innovation, environmental consciousness, and, often, personal freedom. Thus, Karen's demand for the narrator to move his Tesla becomes a focal point of tension. It represents the intrusion of bureaucratic control into an area that the narrator might consider a personal expression of modernity and independence. This collision between personal freedom and institutional rule is central to the narrative, setting up a conflict that promises to explore themes of autonomy versus authority. Furthermore, the narrative immediately hints at an element of irony. While the reader might expect a confrontation in a typical suburban setting to revolve around trivial matters, such as disputes over lawn maintenance or property boundaries, the focus on a high-end electric vehicle like the Tesla elevates the encounter. It subtly challenges the reader to question whether such a piece of technology could ever be subject to arbitrary, petty enforcement, suggesting that the HOA's methods might be as misguided as they are authoritarian. The terse and unexpected nature of the exchange is also worth noting. There is a palpable sense of shock in how the narrator describes the moment. What might have begun as a benign day is abruptly derailed by Karen's intervention. This sharp pivot instills a feeling of unpredictability. The narrator's reaction, though not elaborated in great detail at this early juncture, is left to the imagination. His calm demeanor in recounting the incident contrasts sharply with the potential volatility of the situation, reflecting how ordinary life can be disrupted by the unexpected wielding of power. Finally, the opening scene, by introducing Karen in such a dominant role, primes the audience to expect that the following events may revolve around power struggles within the seemingly mundane confines of suburban governance. It sets a thematic foundation: the intrusion of excessive authority into personal space, the potential abuse of power by those designated as enforcers, and the irony that emerges when high technology meets lowbrow regulation. Shortly after the tense confrontation, the narrator reveals an astonishing twist: his sleek Tesla, which had become the focus of Karen's initial demand, is not merely an ordinary vehicle. In fact, it is a covert charging hub for the governor's electric motorcade, an installation that is part of a state security project. This revelation transforms the nature of the conflict from a mundane HOA squabble into an issue with significant governmental and security implications. In the early moments following the gunpoint incident, while Karen's authoritative tone had struck fear in the narrator, the unexpected purpose of the Tesla provided a stark counterpoint. The narrator explains that the advanced modifications to the car were designed not only to support sustainable transportation but also to serve a critical state function. The covert charging hub is integrated with sensitive security protocols, ensuring that the governor's motorcade can operate reliably at all times. This new information forces a reappraisal of the situation. What might have seemed to be a trivial battle over a misplaced vehicle is revealed to be an inadvertent clash between personal property and high-level state operations. The narrator details how the Tesla's dual role came about. As part of a pilot project for enhanced state security and eco-friendly innovation, the vehicle was retrofitted with specialized charging technology, and discreetly designated for official use. The presence of this technology means that any disruption could potentially interfere with critical state operations. Moreover, the narrator reflects on how the installation was carried out with complete legal authority, following procedures meticulously approved by state officials. This fact is crucial, as it underscores that the Tesla's location and function are not subject to arbitrary fines or local disputes. Instead, they represent a legitimate element of government infrastructure, though hidden in plain sight in the quiet suburban streets of Sunnyside Acres. Despite the high stakes, the narrator remains calm and measured, even as Karen continues to enforce her strict HOA regulations. The juxtaposition of state-level security needs against an overly bureaucratic neighborhood enforcement adds layers of irony and tension. While Karen appears inflexible and overzealous, the narrator knows that interfering with the Tesla's protected function could have far-reaching consequences beyond simple property disputes. Thus, in this part, the narrative shifts from a localized confrontation to a broader commentary on how modern technology and state power can become entangled with everyday life. The revelation of the Tesla's secret role not only heightens the stakes for the narrator but also sets the stage for the ensuing conflict between the personal and the institutional. It challenges the viewer to question the true boundaries of authority, and to consider whether local regulations should yield to higher governmental imperatives. Following the revelation about the Tesla, the narrator delves into Karen's role in the unfolding drama. Karen, the HOA president, had recently moved into the neighborhood and quickly established herself as a zealot for the community's rules. With an iron fist, she had been targeting the narrator's Tesla from the moment she first set eyes on it, even before knowing its secret purpose. Her strict enforcement of HOA rules was not driven by a desire to maintain order alone, it was deeply personal. Karen's relentless pursuit of compliance became painfully evident as she meticulously inspected the Tesla's parking location. In her eyes, every resident was expected to conform to the neighborhood standards without exception. The narrator recalls how, upon noticing his Tesla parked in its usual spot, Karen made her demands in a clipped, authoritative tone. Though the vehicle was legally parked and installed as part of a state security project, Karen's rigid interpretation of HOA policies led her to see it as an unwelcome anomaly in the neighborhood. The narrator notes that Karen's behavior had grown increasingly aggressive over recent days. Observers recalled her patrolling the community with a haughty air and a determined glare, fixated on enforcing every minute detail of the HOA guidelines. For Karen, this was not merely about keeping the neighborhood orderly, it was about asserting her own dominance. The narrator suspects that her fixation on the Tesla might also be influenced by an underlying personal grievance or a deep-seated need to project authority, especially against new residents who might challenge her vision of community standards. During one heated exchange, Karen sternly warned that if the narrator did not move his Tesla, she would escalate the matter to county officials. Her threat came off as both arrogant and disproportionate, particularly when juxtaposed against the vehicle's legal and secret purpose. The narrator, though troubled by the encounter, maintained his composure. He recognized that Karen's actions were driven by a strict adherence to rules that did not account for context. Her inability to appreciate the Tesla's state-sanctioned role revealed not only her lack of flexibility but also her readiness to create conflict where none should exist. Karen's relentless attitude became a symbol of the broader problems within the HOA. What might have been isolated to a mere parking dispute quickly took on a more significant dimension, a microcosm of the tension between rigid bureaucracy and modern realities. The narrator's account paints Karen as a figure who embodies the pitfalls of excessive authority, willing to sacrifice individual freedoms for the sake of enforcing outdated regulations. After Karen's initial threats, the tension in Sunnyside Acres escalated rapidly, setting off a chain reaction that would soon engulf the entire community. The narrator, aware of the high stakes now surrounding his legally parked Tesla, braced himself for what was coming next. Karen's relentless approach and her insistence on escalating the matter to county officials put her squarely at odds with not only the narrator but also the broader network of state and local authorities. On a fateful afternoon, as the narrator was preparing for his daily routine, Karen's verbal threats about involving county officials rang out. She claimed that the Tesla's parking constituted a severe HOA violation, despite all evidence to the contrary. Her declaration seemed designed to intimidate, to coerce the narrator into compliance by leveraging bureaucratic power. Yet, unknown to her, every word she spoke was being carefully noted by the narrator, a growing list of grievances that chronicled her heavy-handed methods. The narrator's unease grew when, shortly thereafter, his neighbor Dave took to social media. Dave's post humorously mocked Karen's rigid enforcement and her ignorance about the true purpose of the Tesla, drawing laughs from the online community. The post quickly went viral, further undermining Karen's credibility and exposing the absurdity of her claims. Rather than defusing the situation, public ridicule amplified the pressure on Karen, setting the stage for inevitable conflict. As if the situation could not get any more volatile, the arrival of a tow truck on the scene marked a dramatic turning point. Just as Karen's threats reached a fever pitch, a convoy of state security agents pulled up alongside the truck. These agents, part of the governor's security team, were tasked with protecting state assets, and the Tesla was now clearly identified as a key component of the governor's electric motorcade infrastructure. Their arrival was swift, their presence imposing, and it immediately shifted the balance of power. The state agents moved in with measured efficiency. Without hesitation, they began working to secure the Tesla, verifying its status as an integral part of state security. One of the agents, speaking in a calm but authoritative tone, informed Karen that any interference with the vehicle would constitute obstruction of state operations. This warning was unambiguous: the Tesla was beyond the jurisdiction of petty HOA disputes, and any attempt to disrupt its function would have severe legal repercussions. The impact on Karen was immediate and profound. Publicly humiliated by the intervention of state security, she was forced to retreat, her threats rendered impotent by higher authority. The incident quickly became a media sensation, as social media buzzed with the spectacle of a local HOA president being overruled by government agents. Despite her best efforts to salvage her pride, Karen's image was permanently tarnished in the eyes of the community. The fallout was swift. In the wake of the state security team's intervention, Karen redoubled her efforts to discredit the narrator. Now desperate to regain control, she began plotting a calculated revenge. She convened meetings with neighborhood watch members and rallied those loyal to her strict enforcement style. Her plan was to confront the narrator again and force him into submission through intimidation, a plan that only further exposed her vindictiveness. Yet, even as Karen plotted her next move, the public narrative had already shifted. The narrator's calm, measured response combined with the unequivocal support from state agents and online allies represented a decisive victory for the rule of law over arbitrary power. Karen's heavy-handed tactics, meant to enforce community standards, were now recognized as part of an outdated and overreaching system that would no longer be tolerated. For the narrator, the events of the day underscored an essential truth. When state authority and community sentiment align, even the most entrenched local power structures can be upended. As the tension in Sunnyside Acres reached its zenith, it was clear that the struggle was no longer simply a personal dispute. It had become a matter of public interest, one that would force a re-evaluation of the limits of HOA power and, ultimately, usher in sweeping changes in how the community was governed. In the wake of the dramatic intervention by state security, the response from the community of Sunnyside Acres was immediate and electric. The incident, with its blend of suburban absurdity and high-stakes state intrigue, swiftly captured the attention of residents both online and offline. Within hours, videos of the confrontation began circulating on social media, garnering thousands of views and sparking widespread outrage. The narrative was clear. Karen, the staunch HOA president, had not only overstepped her bounds but had also embarrassed herself by attempting to enforce outdated regulations against a legally protected state asset. Online, the reaction was swift. Dave, the narrator's neighbor, already known for his quick wit, posted a humorous video commentary that poked fun at Karen's rigid enforcement. His post, replete with tongue-in-cheek remarks about HOA cops on golf carts and the irony of state security stepping in, went viral. The widespread digital mockery revealed a community fed up with petty bureaucratic overreach, and many residents began sharing their own grievances and stories of similar encounters. The social media backlash created a groundswell of support for the narrator, uniting the community in a common cause against Karen's overbearing style. The reverberations extended far beyond online platforms. At local coffee shops, during evening strolls, and at community gatherings, conversations buzzed with indignation over the incident. Neighbors expressed relief and admiration for the narrator's measured response, and a palpable shift in public sentiment was evident. What had once been a quiet, orderly neighborhood was now the stage for a burgeoning grassroots movement, a collective call for accountability and reform in the face of arbitrary regulation. Encouraged by the overwhelming support, the narrator began to receive messages from longtime residents who admitted feeling oppressed by the constant scrutiny of the HOA. Their stories ranged from minor fines for trivial infractions to full-blown harassment during routine inspections. The shared experiences highlighted a systemic problem. The HOA, under Karen's leadership, had devolved into an authoritarian machine that cared little for fairness or individuality. In a bid to channel the collective outrage into concrete action, community members started organizing informal town hall meetings and roundtable discussions. These gatherings provided a platform for neighbors to voice their frustrations and to demand meaningful change. Petition drives were launched, calling for a review of HOA policies and, in some cases, even the replacement of key figures within the organization. The narrative that had begun with a single confrontation had now evolved into a call for democratic reform, one that resonated deeply with a community eager to reclaim its rights and autonomy. Meanwhile, local media began to take notice. News outlets picked up the story, featuring segments that showcased the viral videos, the digital memes mocking Karen, and interviews with residents who had suffered under the current HOA regime. The press portrayal added an extra layer of legitimacy to the community's claims, amplifying the pressure on the HOA to take corrective action. The resulting media frenzy forced the board to acknowledge that the situation had escalated beyond the bounds of a mere parking dispute. In the midst of the public uproar, Karen's authority appeared increasingly out of touch with the community's sentiment. Her initial threats and rigid adherence to HOA protocols were now seen as relics of an authoritarian past, a past that the residents were determined to leave behind. The incident, and the widespread response it generated, served as a turning point. What began as a personal confrontation had morphed into a community-wide rebellion against outdated and oppressive regulatory practices. For the narrator, the viral backlash and collective support offered a beacon of hope. It was a powerful affirmation that even in a seemingly mundane suburban setting, the voice of the people could triumph over bureaucratic rigidity. As the community rallied behind him, the path toward meaningful reform in Sunnyside Acres became clearer. And the stage was set for the next phase of this unfolding saga. In the days following the viral uproar and mounting community support, the HOA launched its retaliatory measures in a desperate bid to reassert control. Karen, determined to salvage her reputation and maintain the strict order she had so long enforced, issued formal notices accusing the narrator of violating HOA standards. These notices, steeped in bureaucratic language and punitive intent, claimed that the mere presence of the Tesla, even as a covert charging hub for the governor's motorcade, was a breach of community regulations. The narrator, already bolstered by public support, felt both anger and resolve as he read the official correspondence. The notices were not only baseless but also designed to intimidate. Karen threatened to escalate the matter to county officials if the Tesla was not moved immediately, even though the vehicle's placement was entirely legal and critical to state security. The escalation was seen as an abuse of power, a final, futile attempt by the HOA to rein in the waves of criticism that were rapidly engulfing them. Realizing that mere words would not quell the injustice, the narrator decided to take legal action. He reached out to a seasoned attorney who specialized in HOA disputes and constitutional rights. In a series of meetings, the narrator and his counsel pored over the official documents, cross-referencing them with local and state laws. The evidence was clear. Not only was the Tesla legally parked, but Karen's aggressive enforcement tactics were in direct violation of the community's established rules. The legal process was grueling. Court filings were prepared, and the narrator's attorney argued that the HOA's attempts to penalize a state-protected asset were not only baseless but also constituted a misuse of power. Expert witnesses were called upon to testify about the Tesla's role as part of a state security project, reinforcing the fact that any interference could potentially disrupt crucial government operations. The courtroom became a battleground for the fundamental rights of residents versus the legal process was grueling. Court filings were prepared, and the narrator's attorney argued that the HOA's attempts to penalize a state-protected asset were not only baseless but also constituted a misuse of power. Expert witnesses were called upon to testify about the Tesla's role as part of a state security project, reinforcing the fact that any interference could potentially disrupt crucial government operations. The courtroom became a battleground for the fundamental rights of residents versus the overreach of local authority. During the hearings, the narrator maintained a calm and composed demeanor, presenting his case with meticulous clarity. His testimony, bolstered by documented evidence and expert opinions, steadily dismantled Karen's accusations. The judge, after reviewing the overwhelming evidence, ruled in favor of the narrator, dismissing the HOA's claims as both unfounded and unconstitutional in the context of state security. The ruling was a significant victory, not just for the narrator but for the broader community of Sunnyside Acres. It sent a clear message: local authorities and HOA leaders could not arbitrarily enforce rules at the expense of personal liberties and state interests. Despite this legal triumph, however, the tension was far from over. Karen's reaction to the verdict was one of bitter indignation, and the HOA board, still clinging to its outdated practices, vowed to continue its campaign against what they labeled improper behavior. In the immediate aftermath, protests erupted across the neighborhood as residents rallied against the continuing harassment. Community meetings grew more passionate, and a petition demanding systemic reforms was circulated widely. The legal victory had emboldened many, and a palpable sense of empowerment spread like wildfire through Sunnyside Acres. For the narrator, the court's decision was both vindication and a turning point. It reinforced the idea that the balance of power was shifting, that even an entrenched HOA with a reputation for strict enforcement could be challenged through reason and persistence. Moreover, the case galvanized other homeowners who had long felt intimidated by arbitrary fines and intrusive inspections. The legal outcome promised a future where community rights would be respected and local governance reformed. Thus, the retaliatory measures from Karen and the subsequent legal battle became the catalyst for change. The narrator's fight was no longer just a personal dispute over a legally protected asset, it was a clarion call for fairness and accountability that resonated throughout the entire community, heralding the dawn of a new era in Sunnyside Acres. The momentum sparked by the legal victory soon propelled the controversy into the public sphere. As the community of Sunnyside Acres demanded accountability, a formal public hearing was scheduled with the city council to address the oppressive practices of the HOA. This hearing would prove to be a pivotal moment, marking the culmination of months of tension and setting the stage for sweeping changes in local governance. On the day of the hearing, the city council chamber was filled with a visibly agitated crowd. Residents from all corners of Sunnyside Acres had gathered, armed with petition signatures, documented evidence, and personal testimonies of the ongoing abuses perpetrated by the HOA. At the front of the room, the narrator took the stand. With an aura of quiet dignity and unwavering resolve, he recounted his ordeal, from the initial confrontation over his Tesla to the audacious legal battle that dismantled Karen's baseless claims. Central to the discussion was Karen herself, the figurehead of the HOA whose rigid enforcement methods had not only alienated residents but had also drawn undue interference into what should have been a benign aspect of suburban life. Karen's actions, once justified as upholding community standards, were now being harshly scrutinized for their role in creating an atmosphere of fear and oppression. Testimonies from multiple residents painted a vivid picture of a neighborhood in distress, where even minor infractions were met with disproportionate punishment. Throughout the proceedings, the evidence presented by the narrator was meticulously examined. Photographs showing the pristine Tesla in its designated spot, contrasting sharply with the unwarranted demands from Karen, were displayed on large screens. Expert witnesses reiterated the legality and necessity of the Tesla's covert function as part of a state security project. Their statements left little doubt that the vehicle was beyond the jurisdiction of local HOA regulations. As the hearing progressed, the tone in the room shifted dramatically. What began as a routine inquiry into a local dispute evolved into a passionate outcry against systemic mismanagement and authoritarian overreach. Several residents stood up to share their own experiences, stories of unjust fines, arbitrary inspections, and an overall disregard for personal rights. These heartfelt accounts resonated with many in the crowd, forging a collective sense of outrage that could no longer be ignored. The council members, initially hesitant to intervene in what appeared to be a private dispute, were now forced to confront the overwhelming evidence of an HOA that had repeatedly violated the community's trust. After several hours of intense deliberation, the council rendered its verdict. The current policies, as enforced by Karen and the HOA, were deemed unconstitutional and a violation of residents' rights. The ruling called for immediate reforms in the HOA's practices and mandated a complete review of how community standards were enforced. The fallout from the public hearing was swift and dramatic. Local news outlets picked up the story, and soon, the scandal was the talk of the entire region. Karen's credibility, long guarded by a veneer of bureaucratic authority, was shattered as the evidence and testimony left no room for doubt. Public opinion turned decisively against her, and calls for her resignation grew louder with every passing day. For the narrator, the hearing was a cathartic moment of vindication. His efforts to document and challenge the abuses were now recognized as a triumph of grassroots activism over oppressive regulations. The decision by the city council not only validated his actions but also galvanized the community to push for further reforms. It was now clear that Sunnyside Acres would no longer tolerate the heavy-handed control of the HOA. Instead, they demanded transparency, fairness, and respect for every resident's rights. As the hearing concluded and the chamber emptied, an atmosphere of hope and determination hung in the air. The public hearing had ushered in the promise of real change, a promise that would reshape the very fabric of local governance and restore power to the residents. This decisive moment marked not the end, but the beginning of a new chapter for Sunnyside Acres. In the wake of the public hearing's resounding verdict, the community of Sunnyside Acres burst into action. The decision to overhaul the oppressive HOA practices ignited a grassroots movement unlike any seen before in the neighborhood. The narrator, alongside countless supportive neighbors, knew that real change required collective, sustained pressure. Immediately following the hearing, a group of residents began circulating flyers detailing the abuses, highlighting the unwarranted fines, intrusive inspections, and Karen's heavy-handed tactics. These flyers, vivid and direct, were distributed door to door, ensuring every household received a copy of the undeniable evidence that had catalyzed the public outcry. Social media channels lit up with posts and videos that recounted the hearing's dramatic moments. Neighbors shared personal stories of similar experiences, transforming isolated grievances into a chorus of communal dissent. The narrator's own testimony and the viral footage from previous confrontations became symbols of a movement demanding accountability and justice. Hashtags urging #RespectOurHomes and #HOA Reform quickly spread across the platforms, uniting residents in their call for a fair and transparent governing system. Encouraged by the overwhelming response, local community leaders organized town hall meetings to discuss the future of Sunnyside Acres. In these gatherings, residents voiced their aspirations for a neighborhood governed not by arbitrary rules but by genuine respect for individual rights. The movement grew organically as more people joined, driven by the belief that united action could dismantle the long-standing abuses of power. The energy was palpable during these meetings. Long-buried grievances were finally brought to light, and constructive discussions ensued about how to create sustainable changes in the way the HOA was run. Residents debated not only policy changes but also practical measures to enhance transparency, such as implementing regular audits and establishing open channels for resident feedback. Amid all this, the narrator felt a renewed sense of purpose. What began as a personal fight had blossomed into a movement that united the entire community. It was no longer just about the Tesla or the petty fines, it was about reclaiming dignity, self-determination, and the belief that every resident deserved to live without oppressive oversight. The collective mobilization served as a powerful reminder that when a community stands together, even the most entrenched authoritarian practices can be challenged and reformed. As the movement gained momentum, there was a tangible shift in the neighborhood's mood. The once stifled residents of Sunnyside Acres now found themselves empowered and hopeful, a community ready to embrace a new era defined by fairness, transparency, and mutual respect. The seeds of change had been firmly planted, and every flyer, every social media post, and every town hall meeting was a stepping stone toward a bright, reformed future. The dramatic events at the public hearing continued to reverberate throughout Sunnyside Acres, leaving a lasting imprint on the community's psyche. During the hearing, the narrator's compelling presentation and the overwhelming evidence against the HOA had triggered a wave of public indignation, forcing city officials to acknowledge the widespread abuses under Karen's leadership. In the days that followed, local news crews descended upon the neighborhood to capture the fallout. Reporters interviewed residents, many of whom spoke with fervor about the long years of arbitrary fines and intrusive inspections. The viral footage from the confrontation, coupled with testimonials from affected homeowners, transformed the incident into a media sensation that cast a harsh light on the HOA's mismanagement. Karen's attempts to control the narrative proved futile. In a high-pressure scene captured by the news crew, she desperately tried to spin the story, presenting herself as the steadfast guardian of community order. However, her efforts fell flat as the incontrovertible evidence and the voices of disgruntled residents clearly painted a different picture, a picture of an overzealous enforcer who had long alienated her neighbors. This public exposure catalyzed significant pressure on the HOA board. As residents rallied behind the narrator, demanding justice and accountability, rumors circulated about potential legal and administrative consequences for Karen. The fallout was swift, calls for her resignation grew louder, and community forums buzzed with talk of reform. Social media platforms lit up as hashtags and discussion threads solidified the collective outrage against the HOA's outdated practices. The public hearing, which had been intended as a forum for addressing grievances, had transformed into a turning point. It underscored the need for a complete overhaul of the HOA's policies and leadership. The fallout not only embarrassed the current management but also energized the community, setting the stage for an even more aggressive push for systemic change. For the narrator, this phase of the saga was both vindicating and sobering. He had stood up for his rights and, in doing so, had inspired a movement that resonated with hundreds of residents. As the media continued to follow the story, it was clear that the public hearing would mark a lasting shift in how the community viewed the once untouchable HOA. The incident had peeled back the veneer of superficial suburban harmony, revealing instead a deep-seated need for transparency and equity. In essence, the public hearing and its subsequent fallout served as the catalyst for the next phase of the community's transformation. A phase in which the old order was being systematically dismantled, and a new, more democratic structure was beginning to emerge. In the final act of this extraordinary saga, Sunnyside Acres found itself on the cusp of a transformative new era. The cumulative pressure from legal victories, public hearings, and grassroots mobilization had reached an irrepressible peak. Ultimately, the HOA could no longer maintain its draconian policies or the authoritarian hold exercised by Karen. Facing insurmountable public pressure and a series of irreversible blows to its credibility, the HOA was disbanded. The dissolution of the HOA marked a dramatic turning point for the neighborhood. With the oppressive regime dismantled, new, resident-led governing body was swiftly elected, one committed to fairness, transparency, and community empowerment. This fresh start promised to replace the previously stifling rules with policies that respected individual rights and prioritized open communication. For the narrator, the victory was deeply personal. The Tesla, once a flashpoint of absurd conflict, now stood proudly as a symbol of both state-level security and the triumph of individual freedom over petty bureaucratic power. The chaos that had rained down on Sunnyside Acres over the past tumultuous weeks had finally given way to genuine hope and renewal. Residents, who had long suffered under the arbitrary fines and invasive inspections, now felt empowered to participate actively in the governance of their community. Friendly debates at local coffee shops, collaborative planning at neighborhood picnics, and open forums in community centers began to replace the silence of oppression. The new leadership pledged to rebuild trust, prioritize the welfare of every homeowner, and ensure that mistakes like those orchestrated by Karen would never happen again. As the days passed, the community slowly healed. The story of Karen's downfall turned from a bitter memory into a cautionary tale of unchecked authority. The narrator, reflecting on the absurdity of the tumultuous events, felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction. He knew that while challenges might arise again, the spirit of unity and the power of collective action had fundamentally changed the way Sunnyside Acres would be run. At a celebratory event in the local park, neighbors gathered to mark this new chapter. The atmosphere was one of genuine joy and anticipation for a future where every resident's voice mattered. With a newly reformed governing board and a restored sense of community pride, Sunnyside Acres was reborn, a living testament to resilience and the triumph of justice over oppression. In this new beginning, the narrator looked forward to quieter days ahead, a period marked by mutual respect, democratic governance, and, finally, the freedom to enjoy one's home without fear or intrusive oversight. The turbulent saga was over, and a peaceful, united future had finally emerged.